Hey, kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News, a Friday night special. We do this show Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m, except when we've got the most important guests to speak to that we'd like to bring on a Friday night and have sort of a one topic conversation for the night. So welcome to the show, Byron C Clark. Hooray! Hooray!
How you doing, mate?
I'm doing well, thank you.
We will get into stuff with Byron super quick. But let me just say, set up some sort of ground rules of what's going on. The chat's already going bananas, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of people in the chat tonight. We'll make it real clear from the start. We'll set up as we mean to continue. We don't typically ban people in the show unless you're a complete prick. So you're welcome to be here, ask a question, share your thoughts, disagree, agree, whatever it is. We respect each other, and if we don't, you go away. We stay, you go away. So we're just putting out the ground rules so everyone knows what we're about straight away. But we also thought that what we do for you guys tonight is if anybody wants to get involved in our super chats, which are open and good to go, we will put up a couple of t-shirts to give away. Those t-shirts there, the Beardy Boy t-shirts. I'm actually got one on right now. It's a bit weird that I'm wearing one. It's black on black. That's the black on black one. So everyone who does a super chat goes into the draw for a Beardy Boy t-shirt, and not that we're expecting a lot, but we'll give away one t-shirt for every 10 super chats. So if there's 3 super chats, there'll be a t-shirt to give away to someone. If there's 30 super chats, we'll give away 3 t-shirts. So if you want to get involved and you want to ask a question, when it gets busy, we're just really blunt with you guys. Super chats take priorities when it gets busy, because if the chat starts zipping by, the thing about the super chats is they sit at the top and we can see them more easily. So putting it out there, t-shirt to be won for people in the super chat, and also Nick's into it already. And also when it comes to asking questions, they get priority as well because we can find them more easily. So that's that done. That doesn't mean they're only going to be questions from super chats. Don't panic. If you want to ask a question, but they do take priority when we're doing this kind of thing. So Byron, let's tell people about you and about what you're up to and what you have been up to. For how long? How long has this taken to get to being sold in the shops?
Well, I got the book deal March last year, and it was a pretty short deadline to get it out for the anniversary of the protest in Wellington and also the anniversary of the mosque shootings in Christchurch. But the book builds on research that I've been doing really longer than that. So even though it was a short time to write the manuscript, I've been following these spaces for nearly 4 years now, pretty solidly and a bit more casually even before then.
So the book is called Fear, New Zealand's Hostile Underworld of Extremists. It's for sale right now. Anything happen with the weather? Did it get out on time? Because you and I were talking earlier in the week and you were saying because of the cyclone that it might have been delayed getting to the stores. Did it all get out in time? Was it all fine?
I think a few stores have got it late and a few people have got their pre-orders a bit later than expected, but things are starting to get more back on track now. So you can probably walk into a local bookstore and there's a good chance that they'll have it, or if they don't, they'll have it pretty soon.
Yep, and we thought the warehouse is a good place to show you what's going on because the warehouse is apparently where everyone gets a bargain. And so there it is there, $37 from the warehouse. Fear, New Zealand's Hostile Underworld of Extremists. But as Byron just said, any good bookstore, that's what they say, Byron, any good bookstore.
Wherever good books are sold, yeah.
Yeah, so if it's not being stocked in your local bookstore, then they don't stock good books. That's how that kind of goes, just like that. Hey, let's kick off. I mean, I know that you've kind of done a group of conversations, and in a lot of these conversations, I'll be asking similar questions. We do want to cover off what the book's about and why you did it, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff we want to get into and kind of delve down into. But let's just start quickly with you giving us a bit of background around the book, why you felt the need to do it, why you got into it, and the process to get it to this very important conversation we're having tonight. The number one interview you're going to do about your book, obviously.
Great. Yeah, so I started following what's broadly termed the alternative right, probably around 2015, looking at what was happening, what was evolving out of Gamergate, this online harassment campaign of women in the games industry, and concurrently with that, how the European far right were reacting to the refugee crisis of 2015. And then after that, we get, the Trump campaign, figures like Steve Bannon, we get events like the Unite the Right rally in 2017. And so while this is going on, I start to think, this country probably isn't immune to this kind of ideology either. And I started watching a few Facebook pages and YouTube channels. And then the mosque shooting happened in Christchurch. And it was after that I thought I should do this research a bit more seriously, not just casually follow some Facebook pages just to keep an eye on them, but I should, start really looking into this and getting the word out. So I started a YouTube channel, which it's on a bit of a hiatus now as I'm pivoting to other things, but I did that for a few years. And as a long-term goal, I thought, well, one day I'd like to write a book on New Zealand's far right. And it was a long-term goal, but then the occupation of Parliament grounds happened last year, and that made me think, well, is this book going to get written? Maybe I should just get to it and write it. And thankfully enough, a publisher approached me looking for a book on this topic, and we were able to work together, get a manuscript together, get it out for the anniversary of that protest.
And just so people know, because you've spoken to us a few times on this show, and you've actually done one of my other podcasts as well. But your background to get here, like, people would look at this kind of work and think, oh, is he an academic? Is he a historian? Is he, studied the alt-right around the world? Does he have a degree in it? What is your background? Because you are being put up as an expert in this, right? Now that you've written the book, you've been talked to by the radio stations, the TV stations for the last sort of 18 months. What is your background that led you to being someone seen by the media and the public as someone who's got the answers to these questions?
Yeah, I mean, I never really wanted to describe myself as an expert. It's just people read what I've written or the videos I've made and they say, oh, there's an expert. And I started to get a bit of a profile during those protests at Parliament. I think because I'd written about counterspin media really before anyone else had. I wrote a couple of articles for David Farrier's website on fake news in New Zealand, and also about my experiences directly with the alt-right. And yeah, when this protest happened, it was all these groups converging that people didn't know a whole lot about, but I had written about them. So suddenly I was fielding calls from journalists to, give comment on this. And so that's how I became seen as an expert. I mean, there's certainly a lot of people in the academic space who are researching different aspects of the far right. I've cited a few of them in the book, a couple that I've had the opportunity to chat to, as well as a whole lot of other people and more professional journalists doing stuff who, have an equal level of expertise to me. I just sort of became this go-to person for a while. And yeah, I'm not an academic. I'm not doing this, in a extremely academic way. But I'm not totally unqualified either. I have a degree in history with a minor in sociology. I've done an oral history project before. So, I bring that history, sociology background, I think, into this book, even though it's primarily, journalism, and narrative journalism. Is very first person, very, my own story of this time, rather than something, more rigidly academic.
Okay. In your process, either within the book or leading up to the book, from what you've found, what you've discovered, are there one or two things you can think of that kind of, I'm not to sensationalize this, but that kind of shocked you more than others? Like, what still shocks you when you see this sort of conspiracy world, alt-right world coming out with stuff, if anything?
I mean, you keep watching it and you do get a little desensitized to some things, which is worrying. I think some of the most shocking stuff that'll shock readers of the book is the way that the material created by the mosque shooter is engaged with in some of these spaces. There's very few people in this country who will openly admit to supporting what he did or supporting that kind of violence, but there's a much wider group who believe in conspiracies about the shooting, claiming that it was some sort of hoax or false flag perpetuated to, take guns away from people as, part of a larger plan, and to promote that conspiracy theory. I do see in some of these spaces, screenshots from the live stream video with red circles and arrows and things, just trying to say, oh, this is fake, this isn't, and all of that has this desensitizing effect, like desensitizing people to, this atrocity. So that's probably the most shocking thing that that I encounter researching this space.
Yeah, when we said at the start of the show, we don't typically ban people. The first person that got banned in 200 episodes was the mosque was a false flag event, and like we're not playing that game. Joey, you got a question or you got some comments you want to throw through?
Yeah, we've got Peter here with a super chat.
Hey.
The fellas here deserve more fans. Thanks, Byron. Too, you suffer for your cause.
Cheers,
Kia
Peter.
kaha.
So Peter's in the draw for a Beardy Boy t-shirt. Super chats tonight get in the draw for a Beardy Boy t-shirt. Good luck with that, Peter.
And we've got a couple of people in the chat here. David, who's a long-time viewer of ours, he's been already reading your book. He's about 47% of the way through, which is very precise. And
must be an ebook. The ebook tells you the exact percentage.
True. Yeah. And Michael Tilliard is excitingly looking forward to his copy on Monday and can't wait.
Fantastic.
So yeah, good stuff.
Have you read your own book? Like, in other words, when you get the copy, have you sat down and gone, I'm going to read this book, and like gone through it and had a look? Is that something you've done? And is it kind of
I did, yeah. Because obviously, I was reading and rereading chapters and things as I wrote it. But when I got my author copy, I'm like, well, I can just read it now without having to. Too late to correct anything. I can just sit down and go through it all. So yeah, I spent I read it pretty quickly because I was familiar. So I spent a weekend just going through. Yeah.
I guess this is a comment in the chat that's led me to a question here. Have you read any of the reviews that are out there yet, or are you avoiding them?
No, I've read the reviews. There was quite a good review in North and South. There was a review in the National Business Review, which I felt like the reviewer had misinterpreted a couple of things I wrote, but it was a very interesting perspective on the book, particularly looking at the conspiracy theories around the World Economic Forum and getting that from the NBR sort of more pro-neoliberalism perspective was quite interesting, because I've written about that, from my own left-wing perspective. And I write in the book that those not so much conspiracies, but opposition to the World Economic Forum traditionally had come from the left when you had the World Social Forum and those protests and things. And now it's become a core part of these alt-right conspiracy theories. And I had my own thoughts on why that was, but the NBR review, I think, added to that discussion because it gave that different perspective. So, I don't think there's any review that I'd call a bad review, just reviews that have been critical in a way that add to the discussion, which is really good. So there was another review by Chris Wilson, who's a lecturer in the counterterrorism program at University. And he, first half, very much praising the book. Second half, felt that I hadn't defined some terms well enough and presented enough evidence. He maybe was looking at it as a more academic work than it is. But then that prompted Mohan Datta from Massey University, who I interviewed for the book, to write a response to that. So the reviews are just adding to the conversation. So it's really good, even when they're critical. It just adds more. So we're having more of a discussion about the whole wider issue of disinformation, the alt-right, conspiracy theories, the security side of it, the political side of it, and I think more will come out from historians and others, and we'll get a lot of good public discussion going on, which is really good to see.
Now, just so people know who are watching, you won't know this if you're listening, because we covered it beautifully, Chewy. I rebuilt my computer today, and I think my battery and my camera might be a bit low. I didn't go anywhere. I was still here. I could hear, but if my camera drops out again, Chewy will take over, and I will reset my camera, and I'll do it through the night if I have to. But I probably should have recharged all the batteries before we did the night. So we'll see how this continues on. But I'm still here. When that happens, if that happens again, for you two to know, I'm still here. I'm hearing, I can still speak to it, just that the camera decides to go, I'm just going to have a little rest for a while. And then I turn it back on. Hey, I've got a their audio version. You know what? That's what I tried to do, actually, Bob. I tried to use, is it called Speechify? And Gwyneth Paltrow reads you the book because I'm dyslexic. And that's how I started to do it. And it was fucking awful. So I hope if there's not an audio version, properly one already, that there is to be one soon, because I'd listen to an audio version as well. I did have a read, but also I think the audio version. So answer to that question, is there an audio version? Is there an audible one?
There may be in the future, but at this stage, I don't know.
Sam Neill?
Oh, that would be a good way to do it. Probably depends how well the book sells, really, and if it'll show that it's a worthwhile investment to do the audio one. But the publisher does have the right to do that if they want to do that. So hopefully in the future, there are for people who want something a bit more accessible. There are like print on demand, large print versions, and in like dyslexia friendly fonts, and you can even get it in Braille. But an audiobook would be really good too. So hopefully that'll be something that happens in the future.
What about international interest? Because obviously you're talking quite specifically about New Zealand and New Zealand groups and the alt-right groups, conspiracy theory groups, but these are threads that run through the world with this sector of I'll call them the political world, but the sector. Has there been much uptake or interest from international audiences for this?
There's been a bit of interest. At the moment, the paperbacks only in New Zealand, Australia, but you can get the ebook anywhere.
Right.
And there's a possibility that there might be a publisher for the paperback overseas. I don't know how much I can say about that just yet, but maybe happening in the future.
Me and Chewie were talking about this afternoon, and it's something that I've had with conversations with people like Kelvin Morgan and some other people out there as well, is the difference between platforming and exposing. There is a sector of New Zealand society that sits on the left that says, on one hand, if you platform any of these people, you're doing a disservice to a cause. And then there are other people, yourself being one of them, Kelvin being another one, who are actually completely platforming them, but it's completely the right and appropriate thing to do because it's exposing them. What do you think about that conversation about when to platform, when not to platform, when to expose, when not to expose? And how did you go through that? Because obviously you would have heard some of these things about platforming people, giving them exposure. How did you go through this decision-making process for you to decide to also then do the book, especially because you've included very specifically chapters on Counterspin Media and Voices for Fuckwits, and although there are actually lists on them, So how did you go through that process?
Yeah. So I think something the mosque shooting showed was that ignoring these currents in our society hasn't stopped them, and it hasn't stopped them from being dangerous. They've just kind of grown in the shadows as mainstream society has ignored them. And so I think that that's been the wrong approach. And I'm very keen on the idea of what's sometimes called pre-bunking. And rather than debunking misinformation or conspiracies, you give people the right information first, so they encounter that before they encounter the misinformation. And so I think a lot of what Calvin's doing, what I'm doing, falls into that category. There's still cases where you need to make the call, like, is this person significant enough that they need to be talked about? And in some cases, the answer is no. There's been a handful of people who I think wanted the infamy of being in the book, but have picked it up and found they're not in there because they're less important than they think they are. And these fringe people with followers in the dozens, I haven't really talked about them much. But something like Voices for Freedom, they're claiming 100,000 people on their mailing list, and Counterspin Media had a following of about 19,000 on Telegram. So they're just too big to ignore. We need to be talking about these groups.
So it's Voices for Freedom. I thought it was Voices for Fuckwits.
I've been doing it wrong the whole time.
I've been doing it wrong the whole time. Look, I think, Byron, in this conversation between the three of us, you're the expert. I don't know how you feel about that, but in this conversation you are. But I tend to agree with you that in general, and I'm saying in general, it's not a black and white, but in general, kind of more speech and more information is better. Because like you say, that negative information is always going out there. So you got to have some of the counter information, the correct information coming from somewhere. So I think it's as a rule of thumb, generally, not always, but in general, I certainly personally would lean towards, and I think this show as well leans towards more conversation. And we've had conversations with people, an American guy who was on, a far right American guy, and people were a bit worried about that. And by the end of it, you give this guy enough rope and he exposes everything about him. It's that pre-bunking thing that you said. I love that phrase, to pre-bunk. It's a great idea. So yeah, I think it's cool. What's happening in the chat there, Chewie?
Okay, well, people really like that question, Pat. Good job. Pat on the back in the chat. Very much like that. We're also a fan of the new name for Voices for Freedom. And we should definitely rip off their marketing at some point. We've got David here. He's got quite a good question. There is clearly fabricated disinformation where the creators are directly fabricating lies, how much of that is created by, I guess, true believers, and how much by outright manipulators?
So it's the zealot versus the grifter. That's basically the conversation. The disciple of the theory versus the grifter to take people's money.
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard to quantify sort of what's what, but I think you've got the people who probably don't believe everything they're saying, but have seen an opportunity to make money off spreading this stuff, and then you've got the people who are true believers and spread it just because it's what they believe, or just for not an actual material gain, but just for the clout, just for the social media following that some of them can get. And I think there's a third category as well. There's a chapter in the book specifically looking at like disinformation, and one thing I look at a bit in there is the role of Russian disinformation. And don't want to overstate how much of this there is. I think it's very easy to become a conspiracy theorist out the other side and blame the Kremlin for all the misinformation, and that's not the case. But there definitely is disinformation being disseminated by states, and I think in that case, these states disseminating it don't believe all the same conspiracy theories. I don't think the Kremlin believes in QAnon, but it benefits the Kremlin's interests to have the American population distrustful of their government and distrustful of their media and their establishment. So there have been, Kremlin-affiliated social media accounts that have pushed this stuff, and there's likely other states doing this sort of thing, and private organizations at the behest of states or at the behest of political candidates. So yeah, it's a mix of true believers and people with something financial to gain, something social to gain, or something political to gain from disseminating this stuff.
This is the interesting point, because as you're talking about Russia, I'm thinking every country would do that on some level as a tactic. Every country would sow seeds of disinformation geopolitically around other countries, I would think. And then I think, in my head, I kind of go, if a Western country sowed seeds of disinformation into, say, North Korea for a positive outcome, is there an element of any means to an end? Is disinformation ever good? Or would we class that as not disinformation, because probably the seeds that sow into North Korea would probably be truth? I don't know. I was just thinking, if every government does it, is disinformation always bad in the geopolitical world, or is it only bad when the bad countries do it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I'd certainly classify putting out information into somewhere like North Korea as a type of propaganda. I think the word propaganda gets misused, and people hear propaganda and they think it means false information. Propaganda means information to influence ideas. So it could be false information, or more often it is correct information that may just be framed in a certain way or not have a complete context, or may be completely true, but it is being disseminated for the interests of a government or a political party or whatever, because they want people to support them. So not all propaganda is disinformation. Disinformation can be. So I mean, if Western countries were feeding disinformation into the North Korean populace, that I don't think that would necessarily be a positive thing, and the ends justify the means. But certainly if accurate information was being fed in. I know there are people who distribute, use flash drives full of documentaries and things like that in North Korea. It's propaganda, but it's not an inherently negative thing as perhaps disinformation might be.
Yeah, that's good. And I was also thinking about, say, internal disinformation, and someone in the chat mentioned Fox News, and I'm thinking, well, that one of the differences, internal disinformation to Fox News seems to me, and I'm not saying it makes it okay, but they're trying to influence their own country to elevate themselves and make money ultimately, whereas an international group doing it is trying to potentially do it in a geopolitical sense, almost as an act of war. But certainly it feels like it's a different and more serious vibe having Russia doing it to a Western country than a a capitalistic angle of doing it within a country just for the grift. I'm not saying it makes it okay, but I can see a difference there. And when you say propaganda, that makes a lot more sense as well when you talk about what happens geopolitically, maybe more so than disinformation. Let's throw Carl's up there, because Carl's given us a super chat, so that gets in for sure. Carl says, usual cover charge. While I'm here, being in these spaces, Byron, what are you seeing that grifters might swing to after climate change denial? We talked about you the other night, just for clarity there, Byron, because we were talking about what was happening with the floods and the storms around the top part of the North Island. And we brought your conversation in, I think it was from stuff.co.nz, saying you're seeing a swing to the anti-vaxxers, anti-mandate into climate change. And I guess what Rex is asking, interestingly enough, is
what next?
What's next? Any thoughts?
I don't know. I don't know what's next. I think climate change will serve them for a while. What I not all of it was quoted in that press interview, but what I said to the journalist there was to summarize the kind of broad conspiracy that has united all the different groups that I write about, because they're not all the same politically, and for some like VFF, I mean, they're not really even alt-right. I've called them alt-right adjacent. But what unites them all is the belief that there's a small group of global elites who are trying to reshape the world economy in their own interest. And what we've seen the last few years is the belief that the pandemic is being used to do that. And there's different factions of that conspiracy theory. There are some who think, the pandemic is absolutely real, occurred naturally, and is just being taken advantage of. There's others who think pandemic's totally fake, it's a hoax put out by these elites, and it's not real. And then there's a third group who thinks, yes, the pandemic is real, the virus is real, it will hurt you, but they believe it's deliberately manufactured in a lab and it's a bioweapon and so on. And so we're seeing a very similar thing already with a pivot to climate change, and it's the same sort of thing. Small group of elites trying to reshape the world in their own interest, and they're using climate change as a means to do that. And so some will say, climate change is real, but they're taking advantage of it to, reshape the world. Others will say, no, climate change not real, total hoax. And then you've got another group who will say, oh, it's kind of real, but it's geoengineering and it's weather modification. And so, so some people might be in that broader conspiracy world that see that as a bit fringe, but they're all kind of in that same worldview. And I think that core conspiracy that a small group of elites are trying to reshape the world for their own interests will carry on. What the conspiracy theorists will jump on post climate change, I don't know, because I think they can get a lot of mileage out of climate change, particularly as we start to see the effects of it more and more.
I'm intrigued to see whether they can. We've had this conversation over the last few nights for obvious reasons. And Byron, my background, I've worked in talkback radio since the early 2000s, for 15 years before moving on. And I've noticed that when I was working in talkback for News Talk ZB, there were a lot more people who were saying it's not real, it's fake. It seems now that the vibe of most people, yes, there are some outliers, is, the climate is changing, but the debate seems to be whether it's man-made or not between that 5%. But most people seem to be on board that it's happening. So I'm intrigued to see whether it gets traction or not. But it is interesting to see. And I mean, you haven't mentioned them in your book, so I won't mention them here, but some profiled people who came out of that protest in Wellington with like 100,000 Facebook followers have not got anywhere near the same traction since they lost that Facebook page. Like they're doing YouTube stuff now and they're doing other stuff, and there's several thousand followers. But since that peak, it was like, I'm sure women's rugby had a massive peak of support at the final of the Women's Rugby World Cup. But it's not going to stay there. There's a profile event that gives exposure to a person or a group or a sport or something in a moment, and then it tails off. And because people have lost their social media accounts, some people aren't getting back to that same level of exposure that they once were. Do you agree with that? Are you seeing that as well? They're not getting the same traction because the public in general aren't as passionate about, let's say, climate change denial as they were about the mandates.
Yeah, I think during the pandemic we had a mix of factors that lead to the audiences for these people. One of them was the social media algorithms that were still pushing people towards this kind of disinformation, not by design as such, but by giving people what the algorithm thought would keep their eyes on the screen for longer.
Right.
And so Facebook, and I've got a chapter in there on which I've subtitled "Conspiracy in the Age of Algorithms," and I look at how Facebook was recommending people join these groups, and YouTube was recommending some of these videos to them. Social media algorithms now, not perfect, and there's certainly people who are getting platformed by these social media companies who probably shouldn't, but I don't think there's that same funneling anymore. And combined with the algorithmic funneling was we had the lockdowns, which caused a lot of people to be isolated in their homes, spending a lot more time online. And the mandates did really affect people, and into negative ways. There were people who couldn't go to funerals for loved ones and so forth. And there were people who, whether their concerns about the vaccine were legitimate or not, they, may have lost a job or had to not enroll in a university or for a semester or whatever because of the mandates. And so people had, real genuine concerns. And I think the situation with climate change, you don't have all those same factors in there. You don't have the people stuck at home in lockdowns getting funneled into these things.
Yeah, then that makes complete sense. True. I see you've got a couple of star chats here, but before we do that, we're kind of halfway through the show. So I do want to, oh gosh, what did I just do then? I did something. I do want to say a big thanks to our patrons, who many of them are joining us tonight, who are supporting the show on a weekly basis. If you're interested in being involved in the work we do, patreon.com/Big Hairy News is what you do. All these lovely people before you are supporting the work we're doing via our Patreon. And as we always say, Chewy, as soon as you become a patron to us, you instantly become 22% more attractive. We're not quite sure how that algorithm works.
And those numbers are firming up every day.
Yeah.
More and more confident.
Thanks to everyone who already is on board with our Patreon. If you like what we do, if you just found us for the first night, then check us out for a wee while. Be a lurker, as one of our Gareth said the other day. Be a lurker for a while. See if you like what we do. Monday to Thursday, we do a general talk kind of news show, news of the day. And then on Fridays, from time to time, when the King is available, and tonight the King is Byron, then we'll do a one-topic conversation as we go through the night. So as it says down the bottom there, come and join the team. Help us make independent news. Visit patreon.com/Big Hairy News. And saying that, Chewy, Big Hairy Man, you got some stuff in the chat there.
Yeah, absolutely. This one's a good question, but I also like the fact that it's been asked. He's realized what a good question it is, and then has chucked some money in the bucket afterwards in his own separate thing. We see you, Gareth. We appreciate you. So Gareth here is curious to know if Byron has noticed any drop-off in anti-government memes, etc. since Jacinda had stepped down. Is Chippy an easier target?
I've noticed a change in the memes, but not necessarily a drop-off. Maybe a little drop-off just because they've got to design new ones now. They can't use all the Ardern ones that they've built up over the last few years. I just recently saw a photograph of there's a conspiracy theorist just south of Auckland who makes these big billboard trailers, and he's done one for Counterspin Media, and it shows Chris Hipkins and Chris Luxon on each side, and in the middle is the World Economic Forum logo with Klaus Schwab above holding puppet strings, and there's some sort of caption that both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition are puppets of the World Economic Forum. So there's sort of memes like that, that are getting created and spread around now. There was a real particular hatred for Ardern, but a lot of the people pushing these conspiracy theories are really trying to say, oh, it's not just Ardern, it's all of these mainstream politicians. The other thing I'm seeing, not in those exact same spaces, but definitely overlapping with it, is the idea that whoever's leader of the Labour Party, that it's actually the Maori caucus who are, really the ones with power. So, so a lot of memes, particularly targeting Nahaya Mahuta, And not just memes, but even was it Garrick Tremaine, the cartoonist, who does some arguably quite racist portrayals of Mahuta and others. So yeah, I mean, I'm seeing probably a similar amount of anti-government memes, really.
I mean, the
let's
thing
go.
that springs to sorry, just one sec, but the thing that springs to mind with that that first billboard that you spoke about, the idea of leaders being controlled by some sort of puppeteer. I mean, that goes right back to old Jewish conspiracy theories and that sort of thing. That's pretty old school. Someone likes the classics there, I think.
Yeah.
The greatest hits, Chewy.
And that's was saying about the broad conspiracy being that a small group of elites control the world, or trying to shape the world in their own interest. Of course, there is a subset of the conspiracy theorists who want to say that those elites are Jewish people, and they're very, very much trying to convince others in the conspiracy theory movement that that's the case, which is why I think we get these outright sort of neo-Nazis and white supremacists blending themselves in with anti-vaccine movement, climate change denial stuff, because if people are already convinced that a small group of elite are reshaping the world, it's only a few more steps to try and convince them of who this small group of elite are.
Let's get a couple more of these super chats. Thanks for your super chats. We appreciate you. Katie wants to know, do you think these groups contribute to Jacinda standing down? So I guess the pressure from the likes of Counterspin or Voices for Fuckwits, or I guess Groundswell, the other ones that you aren't necessarily talking about, but these sorts of groups, do you think they have contributed to the standing down of the former Prime Minister?
Possibly. I mean, it's hard to say. She hasn't spoken a lot about what she went through as somebody in that position, but obviously, as we know, is getting a huge amount of misogyny and people photographing her and her daughter in public and all sorts of horrible stuff like that. And just I don't think any person could not be affected by that in some way. But that said, she was a pretty strong leader and took a lot of it in her stride. And her standing down might have just been, realizing that the polls were showing that she probably wasn't going to get another term, and maybe it was time to move on. So really hard to say for certain. They certainly have taken some credit for her standing down, and that breathed a little bit of extra life into them. I mean, I saw Telegram at its most ecstatic since the Parliament protest on the day that Ardern stepped down.
That was vile.
It's kind of a little bit. It's kind of nice they had something to be happy about finally. I mean, give baby a bone or give baby a bone.
Yeah, given none of these like QAnon Great Awakening mass arrests have happened. We've got to give them something.
Speaking of that, and I'm being obviously tongue in cheek facetious here, but I love the flat Earth theory. Because not because I adhere to it, but I think it's hilarious. And I've had a couple of podcasts with people from there. If there's any of these kind of conspiracies in your kind of work that you've come across, you kind of go, "Oh, that's a bit of a cute one. That's a bit of fun." Or are you in the deep dark web and you're just like, "Fuck, this is all just the worst of the worst"?
It's pretty common for people to get their entry point through sort of more fun conspiracy theories. I mean, certainly. Yeah. People don't go into this space most of the time thinking that there's a Jewish cabal controlling the world. They just think, something's off, and then maybe they'll be convinced of, more outright anti-Semitic conspiracies later. I did see there was a bit of raru on a Telegram chat where the person who operated the channel wanted to ban flat Earth conversation because he saw it as kind of fringe and weird, and he realized that so many of his followers were flat earthers, and they were all like, "How can you do this? I thought you were pro free speech and questioning the narrative." And after a couple of days of back and forth debate, I think the policy became, can we just make the shape of the world the lowest priority and focus on other things? So but you see there's been a bit of a rise in like UFO and alien conspiracy theories in this space lately with the
balloons,
the UFOs and the balloons and everything, and some of that seems a bit more harmless, trials kind of stuff.
No, but you're right, because when I used to dabble around in the flat earth world, I was a part of several Facebook groups to, go in and there, ask them all the questions, that sort of thing. It was after the mosque shooting that several of those people in those Facebook groups, it's the first time I'd heard the phrase, and the phrase has just jumped out of my head, when we shoot it, false flag by some of those people within that context. I mean, I've heard it about, in Vietnam and those sorts of things, but in those contexts, I'm just like, oh, okay. I can see how this point A can lead to point B, can lead to point C, and all of a sudden you're a Holocaust denier. I can see, even though they can be a bit lighthearted, the moon landing, this sort of thing. But yeah, if you're the kind of person that perhaps adheres to that very strongly, then all of a sudden the government is trying to force an injection in my body that's going to make me magnetic. So I'm going to go to Parliament and set up a gallows to hang Mike Pence. I know I crossed a couple of things over there, but you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, you believe that the government is lying to you and that it's hiding significant things from you. I mean, it's much easier to be convinced that, maybe they're lying to you about the Holocaust, or they're lying to you about the vaccine, or they're lying to you about climate change. If you already think they're lying about, where they're keeping the alien spacecraft, or, the Earth's not really curved, or whatever, so it can be a stepping stone on the way to some of these more extreme beliefs.
Yeah. Should we get some of those super chats, Joey?
Yeah, yep. So Ava Rage here, how much cut through with the more moderate Parliament protesters have the more extreme ones had?
So they're saying how much influence have the extreme ones put over the more moderate ones?
Yeah,
that's how I read that question.
I would interpret that as saying, you've got some people that, look, maybe they're upset at the mandates and losing their job, so they've gone into Parliament and they've rubbed shoulders with outright Nazis, people that are involved in deeper conspiracy theories or more aggressive ones, that sort of thing. Like during the Fire and Fury documentary, there was that interview with that the older lady who looked like someone that lived down the street from me, to be honest, that was suddenly wrapped up in almost a lynch mob. I don't think that was someone that would dwell in those spaces, but there they are now, all at the occupation together.
I think a really important thing to remember is that the way people get convinced of this stuff is not so much about the information itself, but about the strength of the relationships they have with the people spreading that misinformation, disinformation. Same thing when you're trying to pull someone out of that rabbit hole. It's not about presenting the right information. It's about the relationship you have with them. But if you are, camping out on Parliament lawns and you're, working together to like build a trench for the sprinkler water to keep it out of your tent, or if you're, one of these people who came across on a rickety fishing boat across Cook Strait because you didn't have the vaccine pass for the ferry, you're building these strong relationships with people. And if that person you've been through this with then starts telling you about, how the cabal is planning mass arrests of world leaders or whatever, you believe them not because they've made a really convincing argument, because you've built a real relationship, but because you've built a real relationship of trust with this person. So I think that some of the more extreme elements had an influence for that reason. And that's just the in-person stuff. There's of course the parasocial relations that people build online with YouTube personalities or whatever as well. So I think there's been a significant influence, maybe not a complete influence over the more moderate ones. And I think it's probably a fair few people who are a bit embarrassed about, what they did a year ago at the protest. But
that would be an interesting follow-up, wouldn't it? I think we might have talked to Paula Penfold about that, about the follow-up. Would there ever be one? What you're talking about is basically proselytizing, though. Like, that's the religious term for it. And the best way to convert someone is to befriend them. It's not often the street preacher on the box on the corner of Queen Street that'll get someone to adhere to your beliefs, but the person that you're having coffee with every week and go, that's how you do it. Which actually leads me into one of my questions. As a former Catholic boy and someone who takes quite a bit of interest in the world of religion, why is Christianity such a huge part to play in this? I'm just looking at the New Conservative, from your book, the New Conservatives, Advance New Zealand, Voices for Victory, Destiny Church. There's a lot of people a lot of groups, and you can see it in America even maybe more so with the, you know, the far right and the GOP and what's happening there with the Marjorie Taylor Greens of this world. They either, and I'll be generous saying, are Christian people, or certainly they claim that title, although I imagine that old JC would be pretty disgusted with some of the things he says. But you know what I mean? Someone acknowledging and adhering to that faith seems to be heavy in this world of alt-right conspiracy theories. What have you found, and why is that?
That was a really interesting aspect of the research, like looking more into, why it is that there's this big influence of Pentecostal Christianity in particular in these movements. And there's a number of reasons behind that. One is the way that they see the role of government. They see that a government should be subservient to a heavenly authority, and so they conceptualize tyranny not as a oppressive government, but a government that is not subservient to God. So when you get a government who is putting gathering limits on religious services or requiring a vaccine pass, that's what they define as, a tyrannical government, because the government is overstepping its bounds and interfering in, heavenly affairs, the ability of people to worship. And if you're a Pentecostal, worship is incredibly important, more so than if you're Anglican or a Presbyterian or whatever. So there's that influence there. There's also in that kind of Pentecostal, evangelical, Protestantism, this history of Great Awakening type events. These apocalyptic ideas of great change that are going to happen. And I cite a historian in the book who's found that these tend to occur at times of significant social and technological change against a backdrop of highly visible wealth inequality. And you read that and you think, oh, we're living through a period like that now. And so I think the QAnon conspiracy theory that talks about a Great Awakening, which is a term originally from Protestantism, appeals to a lot of people who may have already been grown up or been raised in churches who are talking very similar things. So there's a number of reasons I think that that Pentecostal Christianity has become a significant part of this movement.
And the thing that shocks me so much about it, knowing a bit about that world, is it's completely contrary to whatever the original teachings of that world is. This dude, I love this meme. This is a meme I've got that I use every now and again on Facebook. I'll show you when people are talking about it. That's one of my faves. Or on Twitter or something, I just put that in every now and again, because this is the truth about this. Forget if he's real or fake or whatever. The actual things that he taught, like whether it was a Muhammad or a teaching or whatever, the things that he taught are like, put others before yourself, look after the widows and orphans, the least will be the most. It's all this socialist propaganda is what he actually taught, and it's just is not represented in these things that I see from having a bit of a history and a background in that. But I tell you what, Chewy, I want to go into, I know we're getting out of order. If you've sent us a super chat, we will ask your question. But I think I want to go to Kim's question now if we can, because I want to talk about Twitter as well. So let's get Kim's question out. And then I want to ask Byron something about Twitter and Elon Musk at the moment to do with the alt-right. So the question from Kim, thanks for your super chat, Kim. That means you're in the draw for a Beardy Boy t-shirt. Says, I've been interested in the Matt Taibbi's work on the Twitter files. Do you think the social media companies suppress stuff to a New Zealand audience? If so, what type of information?
Yeah. I don't think that the social media companies are necessarily deliberately suppressing any type of information. But I think the thing to always keep in mind is that these are companies whose revenue comes from advertising. If you're a user of Twitter or Facebook or YouTube, you're not the consumer, you're the product. It's access to your eyeballs is what they're selling. So the content that gets fed to you on these social media platforms are things that'll keep you looking at the screen for longer and staying on that website for longer, rather than going and doing something else or looking at another website. And I think that's very much what's driven, some of the conspiracy theory stuff, because it's people feel like they're getting secret knowledge and that it's important and that they can start, putting together patterns by watching different things. And it also, even apolitical stuff, things that just might give you a very charged emotional reaction, and make you want to engage in lots of discussion and debate about something. You look at film Twitter, they're always mad about something, and I think the algorithm probably has some part in that. So I think perhaps information's not being deliberately suppressed, but maybe some of the more calm and collected analytical stuff that we need is marginalized compared to the enraging hot takes and so on.
I'll tell you what is the truth, and I think I'm pretty sure I heard an interview about this on maybe Breaking Points, is that actually 2/3 of the moderators for these social media companies, be they Twitter, be they Facebook, that are based in America, 2/3 of the moderators and the people who keep an eye on the bullshit are based in America for America. So probably the truth is we probably get a more free, more bullshit, more information stuff in our social medias than, say, if you're living in Los Angeles, because these American companies that are the big social media ones of the world focus primarily on trying to keep America cleaned up as much as they can on their social medias. And probably a part of that has to do with litigation and laws and that sort of thing as well. So I think we probably, and I don't know this for a fact, but we probably get more information than, say, America does on our feeds, because we've got fewer caretakers going around and sweeping up the bullshit and it's getting through. That would be my guess.
Yeah, we're just a much smaller market, so I don't think they put as much
exactly
into curating the feed so much. Yeah,
the question we're only on half the maps.
The question I wanted to ask around Twitter specifically was, since Elon Musk has come back on board, do you think that Elon Musk owning Twitter and operating it how he is right now is adding a dangerous element to the alt-right conversations? All the accounts that he's bringing back on board, all the people that he's welcoming, do you think his involvement in Twitter is making it a more dangerous place to be, a more violent place to be, and spreading more mis and disinformation than before he took over?
Yeah, definitely is the short answer. He tweets himself things like, there was one recently saying surprised how many people still trust the press or trust the media or something like that, and he'll reply to known fake news outlets, and he's let all these people back on who were banned in the wake of the insurrection, January 6th, 2021. I think we've kind of gone backwards a bit with Twitter, and I think there's probably going to be more disinformation, misinformation, more harassment, less possibility of getting a resolution to that, because he's also laid off so many people who work in that trust and safety kind of area of the platform. So I mean,
unless it's gentle ribbing of Elon, then those people get banned and shut down immediately.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But if it's abusing a minority, sweet as, it's free speech. If it's like saying semi-nasty things about the style that he works as a manager, then you're banned. So it's a surprising thing that happens, isn't it? These big, strong authoritarians that end up being so thin-skinned, it's kind of a habit.
I mean, I noticed a change almost within the first 2 weeks. Suddenly I saw opinions and reckons that were coming from accounts that I certainly didn't follow popping up in my feed, and I was just like, oh, someone's tweaked the algorithm for more engagement, because now everything I'm reading is making me angry. So I mean, that's the thing. If you want to boost your engagement, get people fighting.
Yeah,
totally.
Yep, blood on the floor. Hey, Byron, do you think you can be a healthy person, and I mean sort of emotionally, mentally healthy, safe person, and be on the alt-right? Or innately does that alt-right position come with some pretty dark and ugly things?
I think, definitely appeals to people who aren't necessarily healthy, well-adjusted people. but I don't think it's a prerequisite necessarily to be, unhealthy and not well adjusted. A lot of people get into it, looking for a community or looking for, self-help. I talk a bit in the book about Jordan Peterson, who's another one I wouldn't label as alt-right, but can be a stepping stone to it. And, people don't go to Jordan Peterson looking for his conservative worldview about a ever-present dominance hierarchy. They go there for the, clean your room, stand up straight stuff. And then some of them can, go further down. But then I think there's other people, particularly to the extent that they have some of the intellectuals in the movement, who I think are probably pretty well adjusted, pretty healthy people who just have an interest in, preserving the power that they have and the privilege that they have, and, see this kind of politics as a way to do that. So yeah, you can certainly be healthy, well adjusted, but if you combine that with, having some power in society that you want to hang on to, and then you can, manipulate perhaps the people in the movement who aren't there because they're healthy and well adjusted.
Chewie, should we get to those last couple of, or not last couple? There can be more if you want. Those a couple of super chats that are in the start one, because we said we would. Planet Walk. Speaking of flat Earth, Planet Walk is a big flat Earth debunker at the moment. Now based in Dunedin, was based out in Chicago. Planet Walk says, "Hi Byron, are you aware of Mick West? If so, what do you think of his work? Also, do you think the alt-right is trying to co-opt left-wing language?"
I'm not aware of Mick West, no, so I can comment on his work. Alt-right trying to co-opt left-wing language. Yeah, I think in many situations, with the anti-vaccine stuff, they adopted the, my body, my choice, and, all this stuff from pro-choice movement. They also, the whole idea of freedom against tyranny, I don't think it's inherently left-wing, but I mean, it's a rhetoric that, you'll hear across the political spectrum, and they've really tried to capture the word freedom for themselves and see themselves as oppressed or marginalized, and fighting the power and fighting the establishment. So yeah, definitely see them co-opting some of that language that, a few years ago perhaps we would have associated more with the left.
I guess if you're talking freedom from tyranny, I guess it just depends on who you define as a tyrant. And that could be either side.
Yeah, I think just to echo what Planet Walk has asked, or at least I think I'm pretty sure this is who Planet Walk means, because this is there's a couple of key points in here. Mick West is an American science writer, skeptical investigator, and retired video game programmer. He's a creator of websites Contrail Science and Metabunk, and he investigates and debunks pseudoscientific claims and conspiracy theories such as chemtrails and UFOs. So I'm assuming there's an assumption, Planet Walk. You can tell us if that's wrong. That's who Mick West is. But, sounds like an interesting cat.
That book title sounds familiar. I think I've put that on my to-read list, though it's a very long list, but I may get around to that at some point.
And what about size question there?
Byron, what do you think mainstream media and governments are not actively debunking the conspiracy theories as a lack of action allows them to spread?
I think there can be a problem with debunking and like coming along after the misinformation or disinformation has been spread and then trying to counter it. There's a wonderful quote from Jonathan Swift that I think I've used in the book, where he says, falsehood flies and truth comes limping after it. And that's from 1710 he wrote that. So this is a problem we've been working on for a little over 3 centuries now and get to solve. And there's a good article by Susie Wiles in the spin-off about how she gets asked to debunk misinformation around vaccines, and she doesn't, because it can end up having the effect of having people remember the false information and not the debunking, or giving the impression that there's an argument here and both sides are equally valid. I think the better approach is, the pre-bunking, like giving people the right information before they get the wrong information. Sometimes, misinformation goes so quickly that any attempt at pre-bunking might kind of be debunking for some people. There was a good article on Stuff about whether or not the recent weather events we've seen could possibly be geoengineering. And I've certainly seen these geoengineering conspiracies pop up on Telegram for a while, but then more prominently the last few weeks. But I think for most people, they would encounter that first on Stuff rather than on Telegram. And then if their neighbor or their uncle or whatever starts talking about geoengineering, they then have the tools to have a real argument with them rather than being on the back foot. So I think, yeah, the media, the mainstream media could be doing more of that pre-bunking, but I mean, there's a few good examples we can point to, like the one Stuff on geoengineering.
Yeah. Hey, now we're coming up to that hour mark. You're right. I've got a couple more questions for you. Have you right for another 5 or 10 minutes?
Yeah, we can do a little more.
So what that means is if people have got questions to get in, you want to get your super chats in as well. You got 5 or 10 more minutes maybe to get that done. And we will get to all the super chats by the end of the night. And there is space right now if you want to do one. Make sure you include your question in there as well. Of course, I should put a little caveat in there. If you're just using a super chat to be an asshole, then and it's not actually a question that we're going to ask, you're just trying to be offensive, then we'll just take your super chat and not ask a question. But in general, we'll ask them. So it's 2023 and it's an election year. And I just wondered from your research and from maybe even just your opinion about the voting bloc for these conspiracy theorists and alt-right people. It seems that they're running away from Christopher Luxon because he thinks climate change is real. It seems that they're going to head towards these small groups, the Freedom and Outdoor Party, that sort of thing as well. From someone who sits on the left and ultimately would like to follow a left-wing ideology, although I still want best government, that's still my first choice above everything else. I'm quite excited by the fact that, 100,000 New Zealanders are going to waste their vote this year by voting for a bunch of parties that get to 1.5% to 2.5%, and it's going to ultimately help the left. What is your research? What is your opinion when it looks to this group of people, the alt-right, the conspiracy theorists, their voting bloc? And if you have any thoughts around what it might mean for the election, I'd love to hear from them.
Yeah. I followed the 2020 election. I followed the fringe in the 2020 election quite closely, more than I was following the mainstream parties, and that was the case for people on that fringe. They weren't debating whether we want a national led or a Labour-led government. They were debating, whether people on the freedom movement should be voting New Conservative or Advanced New Zealand, and I think they both got about 1.5%, and then a few more votes went to, Outdoors and Freedom and Vision and so forth. And we're looking at probably a similar thing this year with a similar number of fringe parties, just in slightly different configurations with some different names, because we've got, New Conservatives giving it another go under new leadership. Advanced New Zealand's gone, but the Outdoors and Freedom Party is still there. Vision is now part of Freedom's New Zealand, who I think they may actually be the only party who's part of that, but they're trying to make it an umbrella party. Then there's also the Evangelical Christian Party 1, who ran a joint ticket with the New Conservatives in the Hamilton by-election. So maybe they might be able to do something similar in the general election, have one less fringe party to split the vote. And the other one, the new one, is Democracy NZ, former National MP Matt King's party. So again, we've got 5 small parties who between them might get 3% of the vote, but divided in such a way that none of them get into Parliament. So, I mean, that potentially, if they're voting for those parties instead of National or ACT, that could help the centre-left parties form a government. Although I think many of the people voting for them perhaps wouldn't vote at all if those options weren't there. There is the other risk as well, is that even if these parties aren't getting into Parliament, if some of the more mainstream parties, which historically has tended to be centre-right ones, if you look at things like the UN Migration Compact, Disinfo campaign, if mainstream parties adopt the talking points of these 1.5% parties because they think, hey, I want to peel off, a few thousand of those voters. So there's a risk of that. And there's also a risk of, if some of these parties start to poll, around the 2 or 3% mark, which, they can easily do if, just a few people in a telephone poll say they're voting for them. And then if they start to get given a platform and debates and things and spreading any misinformation, and then it becomes, looks like it's, a debate that's got valid sides rather than it being a fringe. So there's a worry there, and I think media who are doing like debate moderation and that sort of thing going to have to think about how we deal with that, whether it's some kind of like live fact checking during the debates, or which I think would be useful even for the mainstream parties, because it's certainly the case that not everything they say is going to be completely true either.
I think what they do is they come and join us, and we watch it live with them with our bingo board of vodka shots, and that will be. You should come and join us, Byron, and we'll watch them live with our bingo board. We're already starting to think about words like squeezed middle and various things. Every time they're said, you got to consume, and we'll debunk it all for them, and it'll be a piece of cake in the end. It'll be good. I think what you're seeing is actually a Mr. David Seymour doing kind of what you're describing, trying his best to attract that extra 2% of far right lunatics. However, especially the last week, all he's doing at the moment with all his balls ups, thinking he's going to call out the government for their response to this cyclone, is actually, I think, helping the left. So we'll let him keep going, and we'll let all those people vote for the 2% parties, and then hopefully our side will win. I've got one more question for you. Chewy might have some more questions, and then we'll finish up with the super chat. So this is my last question. I've heard you say that not everyone at the Wellington protest was like an alt-right person. I've been thinking about that for the last couple of days. Like, some of them were sort of innocents. They didn't like the mandates. They had friends who had lost jobs, so they went along, yada 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 yada. I've also heard and read and seen, and I'm going to mess up the saying, but something like, if there is one Nazi sitting at a table with 10 people, then there's 11 Nazis sitting at a table. Now, how do we marry those two things up? Because if there's one Nazi sitting at a table with 10 people, means there's 11 Nazis at the table. That means if there are, the same analogy could be, if there are 200 alt-right people in a park with 1,000 other people, then there's 1,200 alt-right people. I just want you to respond to that, I guess, as an idea.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, while not everyone who was there held these alt-right views, they were kind of lending themselves to that, because the narrative was so much controlled by the likes of counterspin media and the Freedom and Rights Coalition, another Destiny Church front group. And I think if you were there and you were trying to say, I don't agree with what they're saying, I'm just here because I lost my job or whatever. Those people, I think, should have maybe thought a bit harder about what they were supporting. I certainly don't want to like write every one of them off as irredeemable for participating in that. And like I said earlier, I think a lot of people, probably have rethought things, probably are a bit embarrassed about having been part of that. Don't hold the same politics that they held a year ago. But yeah, I think it's wrong to dismiss the alt-right aspect of that protest just because it would have been a minority. That core of it would have been a minority, because that minority had so much influence over the majority there.
And also the other people who you would say were not alt-right actually gave credibility to those that were by the size and the longevity of what it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Shall we got any other questions for yourself, or should we get into anything from you first?
Not so much from myself, but we'll take the opportunity to rip through some of the super chats that we've got through. Now, this is quite a hard hitting one, so feel free to take your time to chew this one over. Rob Burney asks, do you think those on the left are just natural beard wear? There is the promotion of big hairy beards a means to combat the right?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say yes. I mean, I'm not the expert here. Obviously, you're an expert tonight, so you can share your thoughts there if you want. But I think definitely, it's like we were talking about trigger words last night. It's like a superpower, isn't it? It always wins.
I'd just like to point out that someone paid $5 to ask that question.
I think the left are natural beard wearers. There is a kind of a beard that you see on the alt-right though, which I've heard described as the Theo bro look, like the theology bro. Like you get it among some of these young evangelical Christians who will grow a very very large beard and maybe style the moustache a bit. Dewey Du Bois is
I
probably
know
the best
exactly
example of
what you're
that.
talking about. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, you know, we don't have a monopoly on beards on the left.
All right.
You know,
Fair enough.
the more kind of unkempt, scruffy beard perhaps is more of a left-wing thing, and the stylized mustache, quasi-Amish Theo Bro beard is perhaps the right.
Oh,
there we go. There's some of them.
Bang, got it in one.
Gavin McGuinness. Perfect.
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. Planner Walk, I do want to get Byron's opinion on whether transphobia is going to play a part in the upcoming political cycle like it has overseas. I ask as it is prominent in conspiracy theories.
It's definitely one of the themes of the book, transphobia. I didn't do a chapter on transphobia because it's so woven through so much else. And I talk about this as being used as a way to, and I quote I quote another writer there, whose name is escaping me right now, but his book is, Fascism, What It Is and How to Stop It. And he talked about this being used as a way to create a sort of cross-racial coalition against democracy. It's pretty hard to be advocating for, white supremacy in this country, partly because it's really fallen out of favor, and partly because we're barely a white majority country anymore, and we probably won't be within the space of a generation. But if you can target a small minority of people and say, these people are degenerate and these people are responsible for the fall of the once great West and that sort of thing, you can build up this coalition of people based around not a racial thing, but a kind of idea of Western values and Christian values, and I'm seeing that a lot already on the far right, among some of the Christian groups, and but also among ones that aren't particularly religious, but see, especially being transgender, but deviating in any way from heterosexuality and traditional ideas of masculinity and femininity, seeing that as a kind of deviance that is weakening the West and weakening once great nations or countries. So transphobia definitely a big part of modern far right ideology. Whether that's going to play a part in the upcoming political cycle as much as it has overseas, I would hope not. I would hope that we don't see the sort of things we've seen in the UK and some American states. But there's certainly some people on the alt-right who really want to use that as the issue that gets them into a more prominent position, gets their voice out there, particularly like the new co-leader of the New Conservatives, Helen Horton, who's a former teacher who had started a petition against teaching gender ideology in schools, and she's left the profession now to study law and politics because she's making this her life's work now to oppose quote unquote gender ideology.
Look, I tell you why I don't think it'll be a big part of this year's election. It'll be around because some of the minor groups, as you've just identified, will sing it from the rooftops. But one of the reasons it's making such inroads, for example, in America, is because the fish rots from the head. Trump's talking about it, so it goes through the rest of it. I mean, for all the criticisms, and there are many we have of Mr. Luxon, he's not going there. And if he's not going there, National's not going there. Yeah. You might find David Seymour try and pick up some votes for some veiled bits and pieces here and there about the rights of biological women or whatever it is. But because Luxon's not going there, and if Luxon gets rolled this year, which is Chewy's little crystal ball, the next person won't go there either. That it's always going to play a part, but I don't think it's going to play a massive part like you're seeing in some of those other countries. I don't. And look, let me also say thanks, Planner Walk, for the $10. What we'll do is next time we catch up, Byron, I've decided while we've been doing this, because people have been very generous with their super chats, thank you, is dinners on the super chats. right? So when people come together, so we'll do dinner on the super chats. So thank you guys. So just know if you've super chatted tonight, it'll go to have a feed or a drink or something with Byron, and we'll just say thank you for that now. And is there anything else you want to get to, Chewy? Is there other ones in there?
Yep, there are other ones here. Kim asks, what are your thoughts? I assume that's directed at Byron on the Christchurch call.
I think it's good that that's there. We're keeping, the social media companies are keeping some of that more horrific stuff off social media, like live streams of terror attacks and things. I think it's not the only tool that we'd need to solve the problems that we're having. I mean, the live stream of the shooting was abhorrent and would have violated all these terms of service of different social media platforms anyway. But the videos that the shooter watched beforehand that helped him grow his ideology and ultimately inspired him to do that. I mean, the Christchurch call doesn't do anything about those, and maybe it would be overstepping a bit for something orchestrated by governments to be doing something about those. That's I guess a much bigger debate. So I think there's a much wider issue about what gets called stochastic terrorism, content that makes violence more likely, even though you can't draw a direct link, as well as disinformation, hatred, and that sort of thing, and probably a much bigger discussion on than what we're going to have time for tonight. But the Christchurch call, one tool in the toolbox that I think is doing the job that tool should do.
Yeah. Hey, look, before we do get to the last couple of conversations, let me just say this as well. Could you hide that chat for me, Chewy, the one that's up there, because I'm going to put a banner across the bottom. This is, even though we can't get into everything tonight, this is an important conversation, right? And I'm not just saying that because it's our product and we want it to be consumed, but it's actually an important conversation. At the bottom of the screen right now, you'll see that we have an audio podcast of this show. So at the end of every show, the audio from this gets turned into an audio podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Google Podcasts, and actually the video and audio are on Spotify. The way that you do your part in all of this is, and forget me and Chewy, this is the way you do your part, is to share what Brian's been talking about, to get the word out there. This is the way we pre-bunk, as Brian's been saying. You get Byron's words out there to people, and the way you do that is to share what you've seen tonight. You follow us all on Twitter, because I'll make some clips of this over the weekend and that'll go out there, and you subscribe preferably to us on Apple Podcasts, and you share that content as well. And that helps us, as much as any kind of support we get, helps us in the algorithms, helps the messages go out. This is an important message to get out, and that's where we rely on you guys to actually pass it around, get it out there, let people know what we're doing, and let people know a bit more about what Byron's up to, what he's been talking about and what he's shared tonight. And I think, Byron, without kind of saying yes too much, is you won't have this exact conversation on any other media source. We can go a bit deeper and have a bit more fun, and also, probably delve a bit deeper than you can into 13 minutes on Q&A. Although we love Jack Tame, but we can go a bit deeper. So the way you get on board to help is to subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the audio podcast, and we always say #share our shit. When it goes out there, share it around, let other people hear Byron's words, and it's the way you become a part of the fight against disinformation, the alt-right community, and conspiracy theories. Here endeth the advert. Chewy.
Now, David's asked this a couple of times, so I'm going to pay attention to it. How much of a problem is dog whistle and couched language in support of outright views for politicians and mainstream media figures? Do you think that those that do so in ignorance?
Yeah, I think sometimes they'll know what they're doing. Other times it will be ignorance. I talked about I've got a chapter in the book about, which I've titled "Watching a Disinformation Campaign in Real Time," and there was a disinformation campaign about the UN Migration Compact, this UN agreement around international migration that came about as a result of the 2015 refugee crisis. And that misinformation campaign, started by a small far-right group in Europe, spread around the world through social media. When it got to New Zealand, it wasn't just social media that was used. There was also a concerted effort to ring up talkback radio. And by doing that, it created this impression that there was huge groundswell of opposition to this agreement. And there was an interview that Mike Yardley of ZB did with Winston Peters, who at that time was foreign minister, where he was, spreading some of that disinformation, or at least sort of, dog whistling to it, because that had been a core part of ZB's audience, had been people ringing up expressing their opposition. And I don't think he was doing that knowing that this was a far-right disinformation campaign that started with Generation Identity, a group that the mosque shooter donated to. This is later down the line that he did that, and that we learned about that. I think he was, doing that through ignorance, because the campaign had shifted the public conversation, at least in that sort of right-wing media sphere. It had shifted it away from, away from the facts and more towards the speculation of what it might mean and that sort of thing. So I think, journalists, politicians, got to be really cautious to not allow themselves to be used by these campaigns, because it's certainly a possibility, particularly in mediums like social media and talkback, where you've got that audience participation and the audience, if you've got a concerted effort to shape the conversation, you can potentially do that.
Let's do this, Joey. Let's just say thanks to Julie Koha for an extra beer. We appreciate that. Wonderful. Julie. I didn't tell people that's the reason we did it, but thank you very much. And even look, Kookie has come out with $50. $50 beers are on him.
Jesus,
so thank you, Kookie. That's it. No, we'll be able to get them their imported beers, boys. With that. So thank you very much. But the reason I brought those up is to say this is our last super chat question. So because we got to let Byron go, we can't keep him here all night. So if anyone else does it, I'm just giving you a fair warning. If anyone else does a super chat between now and the end of the show, it probably won't get put up. Happily take it from you and continue it into the every dollar that comes in, we're getting one extra beer or one extra steak, or it's going to something on the side as well. So just giving you free warning. We've said we'd mention all the super chats. If you do it from here onwards, it may not get mentioned. You're welcome still to do it. Let's get to Ayrton's question just to finish up. Ayrton, thanks for the $20. We appreciate it. I have a mate who started off rightly being angry at the capitalist/corporate system we all live under, but very soon went down the rabbit hole of conspiracy. How do we address the half-truth aspect of certain conspiracy? Great question.
Yeah. It is a great question, because I do address the issue of people from the left getting involved in this stuff a little bit in the book. I mean, it's primarily a book about the far right, but I think if your politics are limited to a sort of populist, the people versus the elite, then there's a real possibility of being on the political left, being that first step into that conspiracy theory world. One of the things I did much earlier than this book, years ago, I did an oral history of Occupy Christchurch, our local offshoot of Occupy Wall Street, and one of the big slogans of the Occupy movement was, we are the 99%. It was, it's us, the people, against you, the 1%, the elites. And I think that when the far right is pushing this same idea that, the small group of elites are trying to reshape the world, then, people who might have been drawn into like left-wing populism years ago can say like, yeah, I'm on board with that. And then they can take on some of the other ideas. I think the solution to that, probably if you're someone on the political left, is making sure that people don't stop at the people power, us versus the elites, we are the 99%, but maybe educate themselves more to understanding, how capitalism works. Because, there's a half truth in there that there's, elites, but it's not really that simple. I mean, the small group of billionaires don't actually, control all government policy. I mean, your landlord who owns 2 properties, or your employer who employs 6 people, are the ones who are voting for the centre-right parties. It's not, the world's billionaires who probably have enough money that they maybe aren't even participating that much in politics. So having a more grounded and reasonable understanding of capitalism and class is probably one of the ways there, and understanding how social change happens and what actual collective organisation is, through like organised labour and things, rather than just big populist protests. Not that there isn't a place for that. I don't have a pre-prepared syllabus for things you can read or study, but there's I mentioned I used to do a YouTube channel a few years ago now. It's kind of still going, but there was this whole movement, BreadTube, which was often a lot of quite highly educated people putting out this kind of intellectual left-wing content in a very accessible format. So there's ways to self-educate and collectively educate and groups and things that I think can give people a solid grounding, that if they do have legitimate concerns about the world's rich or whatever, they can then not end up on a pathway to one of these conspiracy rabbit holes, but maybe end up instead doing something more productive. Or
BreadTube was sort of the response to, what do they call themselves? The intellectual dark web? It was sort of the counterpoint to that a little bit, wasn't it? So
definitely, yeah.
I think we should definitely wrap up by putting up that quote from Plan a Walk that you just highlighted there, Chewy.
We did an hour-long show thinking we'd get away with it, but someone's worked us out. These super chats are an outright plot to not let Byron sleep. So there you go.
Hey, it's been fabulous to speak with you tonight, Byron. We've been looking forward to this, and let's just tell people again the reason that we're talking to you is because we love you. No, it's because we do love you, but it's also because your book has just come out. Have you any words yet about the charts or anything, like the New Zealand book charts, or do we know anything? New York bestseller or something like that?
Till next week. I did see there's 100 people in Auckland who have it on hold at the library, so some of them are going to be waiting a while, because as far as I know, the Auckland Library's got about 15 copies right now. They might order some more though. So there's definitely a lot of people really looking forward to reading it one way or another. But won't know the sales until about this time next week, I think.
This is a bit of a moron question. It's one of those questions where we kind of go, when people, you have your first baby and like you've had your first baby 3 days ago and they're like, so are you planning the second one? But I'm going to ask it anyway. So have you got another book bubbling up? Like, have you got another thought about what could come from here, or are you just resting on this for a good while?
Having a bit of a rest now will be good. But, certainly, particularly with, I think, the climate change issue that I talk about the pivot to in the final chapters, I mean, that's going to become more of a thing, particularly as we start to see, major disasters like we've seen here, but in countries that don't necessarily have the wealth or the infrastructure to deal with that. We're going to see a lot more displaced people, and some of them are going to be crossing international borders. And so we're going to see something even more significant than the 2015 refugee crisis that really drove the growth of the far right. So I think there's probably going to be a need for more research on this, and whether that means another book from me, or whether that means there are other people who will do it better, remains to be seen, I guess. But I'm keeping options open. I think if people are wanting me to write further, then I might have to listen to them and do that.
Might have to oblige and then do a circuit around the world again. Hey, well, listen, we have a date set up, boys. Whenever we see you next, Byron, we'll be out for dinner or for a drink or for whatever it is. Thank you very much for everyone who participated in the chat, and especially the super chats as well. We do appreciate it. We don't normally drive that very hard, but it's a special night, and we want to do something to, I guess, acknowledge Byron, what he's doing. So I'm committing to you that any of that money that came in tonight will be used on a social event that Byron's going to be attending when we see him next. And I haven't said this yet on camera. I know I said it off camera, but your hat is fire. Just quietly, just so you know, it is possibly as a person who wears caps all the time, no matter what. I'm a little bit jealous of your cat. It is absolutely fire. And that's about us. Chewy, you got anything you want to wrap up with?
No, I think we've covered everything. I just mentioned in the chat that everybody's been an absolute diamond tonight. We really appreciate having along for what is I have termed a very special episode, trademark. We don't always do a show on Friday, but it's a good space when we really want to get our teeth into something. And thanks again to Byron for generously giving up your time on a Friday night.
Yeah, hang out with us losers. Haven't got nothing to do sitting in our fucking basements. All right, Byron. All right, Chewy. All right, team. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back Monday night from 9 p.m. for another regular edition of Big Hairy News, looking at the news events of the day. Remember, you can subscribe to us on YouTube. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. We do have a Facebook page as well. To be honest, we don't use it that much. And also, if you follow us all on Twitter, Byron included, then when we put clips out, you'll get the clip version of them as well. And if you feel so inclined, you can visit us on Patreon, patreon.com/Big Hairy News. All right. Hate to love you and leave you, so we'll just leave you. See you on Monday.
Hey.
Everyone have a good weekend. Hooroo.